Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode, and we will discuss on global stock take. Uh, it's a side talk of COP27. You know, this COP27 is very important for the global community. We are trying to review these COP20 discussions and promoting different kind of informations based on the COP26 topic. We have our world famous speaker, Professor Dr. Talib Rafael. We have another world famous speaker, Professor David Smith, and Dr. Musa. Dr. Talib Rafael, you play a role as a UN WTO Secretary General. So, what do you want to share about COP26? What do you mean by global stock take, and how the emerging economy can uh, get positive support through COP27?
Okay. Now, COP27 was held in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. It's the first time it's held in the Arab world in Africa. But the issue is not that of where it's held. It's the issue is one of how important this is to the developing world. The developing world is on the receiving end now of the climate change thing. It's not active in any part of climate change. We in the Middle East, North Africa, for example, we have one of the hottest zones in the world, but we are always unaware of it. And we try as much as possible to bring it to the attention of people. People are not very concerned about it. People have other priorities in life, and they think that this is something that will pass by. It's something that's made by the big powers of this world, not by the small countries. That's for sure. That's what I want to say for the time being.
Thank you. Professor David Smith. Dr. Musa, if you open your camera.
Okay. So, Sharif, you want me to go ahead and jump in? So, what really the global stock take is it started back with the Paris Accord, and it's a process for taking stock of where the implementation is headed. And Dr. Tlaib is 100% correct, is that part of what we saw in COP27 in particular, as we look at some of the output, is changes on how you look at the stock take of this, of how the world is collectively moving towards achieving the purposes of the agreement and its long-term goals. The COP27 was the second technical dialogue around the first global stock take. And it's one that the Secretary General of the UN wants to have a climate ambition summit happening in 23 ahead of COP28 that is built upon this whole stock take idea, because the stock take is about accountability, it's about acceleration, and actually about the UN Secretary talks about the ambition of each of the parties within it. And the executive in charge of this one, the UN, stresses that this is much more than just a technical exercise. It's really one that's intended to make sure that every party is holding up their end of the bargain, knows where they need to go next, and how rapidly they need to move to fulfill the goals that each of the countries is signing up for underneath the agreement. But Dr. Tlaib is 100% correct in that as you look at the parties around the world, many parties believe, gee, the other people will do the work and I don't necessarily need to do the work. And that is part of what the global stock take is trying to address, is how to put the plans in place to have the work done. So in traditional business, what this is like your global schedule or your project plan or your product plan, is how do I put them in place? How do I know the work is being done? Are we ahead of schedule? Are we behind schedule? Are we resourced appropriately? Do we have the appropriate money, the appropriate people, the appropriate infrastructure and things in place to get it done? So in many ways, what the global Stocktake is very comparable to what we try to do in the enterprise world every day, is look at how to take stock of what we have, move it forward. I have actually done stock takes in the past where I called them crosswalks, because we took each of the areas, each of the stakeholders, and we walked through what they're doing. And that's part of what the UN is trying to do with these global stock takes between the different COP meetings. And I'm actually really encouraged that one of the outputs from this is that there is going to be this other activity between now and COP28 that will let us go back and take even a deeper dive into what is necessary to achieve the climate change uh, activities and how to make it each. So every COP is every 2 years. The global stock take is a 5-year process, so it overlaps. But these other meetings before it to help synchronize and put in place, particularly as Dr. Tleef said, and we've talked about in earlier programs, a big part of COP27 is to look at how do the developing nations, how do the very vulnerable countries uh, play within this overall characteristic. And there was a new agreement on a loss and damage fund out of COP27 that will directly impact how the developing nations can respond to their requirements and expectations under the COP27 activity, and actually even under the initial Paris Accord as well. So to me, Dr. Sharif, that I think is a good place for me to stop and jump in and hear what the others are going to say.
Thank you, Professor David Smith. Now I request Dr. Musa.
Yes, thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be with you all to talk about the stock take. So it's a global stock take. The global stock take of the Paris Agreement is a process, for taking stock of implementation, of the Paris Agreement. So we want to make sure that everything is going, perfect, and COP26, COP27, and it will be, in COP28. So the aim, to assess the world collective progress toward achieving, the purpose of agreement and, the long-term, goals. So to complete, what other, amazing speaker said about, global stock, I want to say that there's, like 3 phases. Let me say that, this, global stock for 3 years start at the, COP26 and continue at COP27 and will, all the output will be at COP28 in Emirates next year. So the first, global stock take, the first phase is about, collecting and preparing information about, UN climate change, to gather all the information, regarding that. And the phase 2 is about, technical assessment period that will happen, in Sharm el-Sheikh, in Egypt, start in June this year, and will run until, June next year, because, the leadership of Egypt will, for a period of 1 year, include, in-person dialogue, UN, climate conference, and, together all the stock take, solution, mitigation, adaptation, and implementation. And, the last phase will be, in Emirat next year. It's about presenting the key findings, for the first global stock take, at COP28 at the end of 2023. So I think there's a lot of achieved, in the previous conference regarding that, For example, at COP3 in Japan, greenhouse gas, and also the Bollywood made in 2007. In 2015, at COP21, the Paris Agreement, about for all countries in all the world to keep the rise in global average temperature to 2 degrees. And also, at COP26, the launch of, agreement to reduce methane, emission by 30% by 23. And, for COP27, because of Egypt, represent Africa and will help a lot regarding, developing country to get finance and to get, help from the developed country. And there's, global leader have made ambitious, climate promises nation and done a lot, in this, COP27 to move toward accountability, for the climate solution. Thank you so much for your invitation.
Thank you, Professor Rob.
Well, if you look at the global stocktake, basically it's a set of measurements that are put in place to measure progress against an overall goal, and it's not going well. The initial assessment is by 2030 we needed to drop our greenhouse gases by 9% from 2010 levels. The latest reports indicate that we're going to be 16% above the 2010 levels by 2030 at the current rate that we're executing. So that's problematic. One of the big problems with Paris Accords is there was little in the way of incentives or penalties to assure countries achieved their underlying goals. And the other issue is 50% of the greenhouse gases are produced by China, 25% by the US. So for the rest of the world, it kind of looks like, well, we can bust our hump to get this stuff done, but we're only going to have an impact collectively on 25% of the problem. So why is this our issue? Why is it China and the United States? And I can certainly appreciate that the consideration. The difficulty is this is a case where kind of everybody. If you're not speaking, could you mute your microphone because we're getting music bleed through? Thank you. So the measurement against the milestones is not going well, and it's certainly important to have measurements, but it also is very important to have incentives and penalties if people don't meet those measurements. Otherwise, progress won't be made. And at this particular point in time, the Paris Accords don't appear to provide the level of incentive or penalty required to actually make the progress that they hope to make. Most of the big movements are towards the middle of the century, where it makes it look like the political parties just moved things off to a degree that they'd be out of office by the time something actually happened. We had the same kind of issue back when we had the near total computer crisis back in 2020, when the computers were going to have to be reset. And those of us that were doing studies at the time found that a lot of the companies that said that they were well ahead of the curve, coincidentally, their CIOs were set to retire right prior to 2020. And so they just figured that, they'd be gone when everything blew up. And that wouldn't be a huge problem, at least not for them. Fortunately, that was corrected on virtually every place where it was found. And we did not have the collapse of the computer ecosystem due to a dating error in programming that had occurred decades before. That was required, but that required a tremendous amount of force in that last year, tremendous amount of effort in that last year to get the job done. And with climate change, things don't happen fast. We can't wait till the last year before 2050 to get everything done, because you'll have the collective damage up to that point that you'd be dealing with. And even if it was possible, which I have my doubts, to make that kind of a change in 1 year, it wouldn't have the impact that we would need. So right now, with regard to our progress on climate change, we are still going in the wrong direction, with all the projections indicating we're going to be worse off in 2030 than we are today with regard to greenhouse gases. And all the measurements are going to tell us is just how badly we missed the projections that we had put in place. So my view is until that there's a better set of incentives and penalties tied to this underlying effort, it is unlikely we're going to hit the underlying goals, and we'd be better off spending our time trying to figure out ways to mitigate the kinds of events that are going to occur as the climate continues to change and become more harsh. Change building methods, build higher, put in place stronger breakwaters, stronger dikes, but prepare for the movement of large amounts of clean water to areas that won't have it, coupled with looking really hard where we're wasting this precious resource and really rethink farming. The farming is one of the biggest consumers of water, and strangely enough, with regard to cattle farming or ranching, one of the biggest producers of greenhouse gases. And those kinds of things can be fixed with feed. Certainly can be fixed with efforts like advanced desalinization, though you have to watch the consequential damages of that as well, because it can result in a higher level of pollution in the oceans. And if we wipe out life in our oceans, we're still pretty much screwed. So we do have to be careful about consequential collateral damage when we're making a lot of these efforts. In the end, it's good to have measurements, but whenever you're trying to make, and I'm an ex-internal auditor, whenever you put in place a set of measurements, you have to have a level of enforcement that assures the people that have committed to these things meet the measurements that have been set. That doesn't exist here, and that my belief is that's why we're going in the wrong direction still, even after all this effort to capture and report how the various countries are doing against their objectives. And so until that part's fixed, our efforts would probably be better spent, especially in the 25% of the world that's not generating the majority of the greenhouse gases, and figuring out ways to mitigate the coming problems, because it won't be stopped.
Thank you, Professor. David Smith, we are observing right now that our youth community is entrepreneurs, our small medium entrepreneurs. We find that
You're freezing up.
Dr. Musa.
Hello, is this question to me or to Dr. David?
I think the question was to David, but I don't think we could hear the questions because Sharif froze.
You're free. That was my point, is I couldn't hear the question. I heard that he wants to know about small, medium-sized business.
No, he's frozen again.
Sharif, I will answer a question. If it's not the right one, then redirect me. Yeah, I think as you look at the global Stocktake, it is applicable to entrepreneurs. It's applicable to small, medium-sized businesses, and actually even to the next tier of larger companies as well, particularly companies that are not the global ones there. As Rob had mentioned, the metrics, the KPIs, which are underneath the accord, we're missing them pretty bad. And some of them are going the other direction. And yes, the United States and China are some of the largest contributors, but you would almost expect that when you look at the type of impact they have in manufacturing and in production globally. You know, and Russia is right there behind them in some ways too. We also see, though, that one of the reasons some of our numbers are going the other directions are because of things of conflict, like what we're seeing with the war actions today, and even the increased volcanic activities we're seeing, like the eruption in Hawaii right now, are contributing to some of the climate numbers as well. But it is easier for entrepreneurs, easier for small and medium-sized business to bring innovation rapidly into place, particularly in the developing nations. You can look at some regional applications as you see what's happening and apply the regional instances there. Since, as Rob pointed out, the developing nation, well, a lot of the world, but particularly focused on the developing nation, accounts for 25, 30% of the overall impact. But if you can take that 25% and have a positive impact, then the differences can have an impact on the overall global targets and numbers there. And it's important to look at that. The other thing is, if you look at legislation related to climate action, actually the larger countries like the United States, like China, like EU as a collective, have regulations in place to begin to try to help enforce some of the targets. The developing nation mostly does not have regulations in place to address these because they, as Rob pointed out, feel like they're such a minor part of the equation. Why bother? But I believe that even on the government action side in the developing nations, the government can have an impact as well. So, Sharif, yes, the entrepreneurships, the small, medium-sized businesses can have an impact on there as well. And since we still don't have him back yet, I'm going to pass it on over to you, Dr. Mercer.
Hello?
Yeah, I think since he's still not back, why don't you go ahead and give us your take?
Okay. So I want to talk that in COP27 there is a lot of target they wanna make. For example, to create a financing mechanism for addressing loss and damage. And I think Egypt and all countries succeeded in this item regarding is not scheduled in COP27, but because of China and the developing country insisting to be in COP27 and succeed in it. Also for scale up support for adaptation, for strengthening national emission reducing target, for assure that the 100 billion climate finance promises will be met and move forward in new commitment. And I think this there's delay regarding this item because I think the developed country not fulfill promises about that till now. Also for advance the global Stocktake to set the base for climate action. And the last item, convert the turf of Glasgow and UK climate commitment into action. So if I'm going to talk about item 5, the advance the global Stocktake to set the base for climate action in COP27. So first, the Paris Agreement established a global Stocktake, a process conducted every 5 years to assess the progress towards the agreement long term. And I think it started in COP26 and will finished in COP28 at Emirates, and COP27 still in negotiation and do a lot of strategy regarding that. So the first global Stocktake kick off in 2021 at COP26 and include in 23 at COP28 to be held in the United Arab Emirates. COP26 opens the first global Stocktake by calling on countries and non-state actors to submit information that can feed into the process technical dialogue and continue to do this year in COP27 and still in process till next year in COP28 consider the information collected. So this year in COP26, new and innovative format of global Stocktake, including a world capacity of discussion, allowed for interesting conversation among country experts and the non-state actors. A global Stocktake need to spend next year advanced technical assessment in COP28 toward Paris Agreement goals with a political package that will drive forward action. So it will consider synergy with several dialogue and the process launched at COP26, include discussion, about global goal for adaptation, loss and damage, and I think in loss and damage you did a great job. Also for mitigation and the new financial goal to ensure the ambitious response for climate action and support for the critical decade. So it's essential the outcome from the global Stocktake is politically relevant and not just information sharing exercises. So COP27 help in shaping the Stocktake direction by offering the space for countries, experts, and non-state actors to develop a common vision. Thank you so much. My pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. Dr. Talib, can you hear me? Dr. Talib? Professor Rob.
So what we're trying to do is we're trying to save the planet, and we're doing it in a very haphazard way. And the real issue is to a large extent the planet moves on profit, and often individual profit. And right now sustainability efforts and profit are at cross purposes in most cases. You incur costs to be more sustainable, and to a large extent that's because the governments of the world, the tax structures of the world, who have the power to make polluting costly, so that the people, the individual entities, the industries that pollute are motivated to stop the pollution, have not stepped up. And the reason is they don't want to affect their gross domestic product, nor do they want to piss off their voters. And when you're talking about asking people to make changes, whether it's conserving water or using electricity as opposed to fuel, you're asking people to take on hardship. And when you're asking people to take on hardship, you really have to drive this down to a personal level and show them the benefits of the hardship they're taking on. Now, what's kind of interesting, if you look at the happiest countries in the world and you look at the most sustainable countries in the world, there's actually quite a bit of correlation. I haven't done the work to suggest there may be causation there, but the fact that there's correlation would suggest that, say, for instance, Finland, which is ranked first in happiness and fourth in sustainability, largely because it's a cold place and people burn a lot of stuff to stay warm, showcases that the citizens can be pretty happy in a country that is fairly sustainable, and making that connection to the citizens that maybe it's the priorities that need to be changed in order that they're focused on the things that drive happiness, and therefore solve the problem that way. In other words, make happiness the goal. The fall off of happiness is there, or the part of the creation of happiness is less consumption, because the more you consume, the poorer you are at the income level that you currently occupy. And so if more people save more, spend less, they'll have more for retirement. They'll have more money to do fun things. They'll live more simply. So there's a lot less stuff to worry about. And if you have a lot less stuff, worry about somebody stealing your stuff is also reduced. And the motivation to steal is reduced as well. So you get what is potentially a circular benefit of happiness, and the fact that at least it looks like the more sustainable the environment, the happier the people are, and we would again need to do the work to confirm that is the case. But at least we can say that being sustainable doesn't have to result in unhappiness, because the fourth ranked sustainable country is actually the happiest country in the ranking. And if we looked at the top ranked sustainable countries, the happiest countries, there is a lot of correlation between the two lists, suggesting that those two elements could combine. So I think the effort, if we're going to really drive towards sustainability, we have to find a way to motivate the common man, the average citizen, that I should say common man, common person, to be correct, motivate the common person and get them on board, because it's in their best interest, not long-term and strategically, because trying to convince somebody of a strategic goal is always problematic. That's the insurance sale. You've got to convince them of something they don't see in front of them in order to change their behavior. That's hard, but it's a lot easier to say that there's a near-term benefit to this behavior, and that you'll be happier. You'll be more content in life. You'll have less stress. You don't need all this stuff that you're picking up. Do you need a car, for instance, or could you just live on Uber or Lyft? And recognize that while you say, well, we'll still be using the same amount of gasoline if you're using a service, yeah, but you're producing less cars. So the end car production is whether we're talking about electrics or gas, the production of the vehicle is one of the dirtiest parts of transportation. And if you can lower the number of vehicles, by the very nature of doing so, you lower the amount of waste you're putting in, everything from landfills to the pollution that's generated by the underlying factories. And so moving from a purchase methodology to more of a borrowed rent, not rental so much, but an occasional use capability means that a lot of those cars that are currently spending 90% of their time in garages are not. They're out working, and so the cars that are being built are being more effective in doing their job, which is carrying people around. So in the end, looking at this perhaps a bit differently, looking at individual happiness and connecting it to sustainability, looking at the underlying engine of consumption and getting people to change their consumption behavior so they're not over consuming in order to carry the economy. And if they're going to consume stuff and overconsume it, then consume things that are easily disposed of or recycled. So organic materials, take pleasure in better food, because food degrades fairly well if you don't eat it. The connect status to quality of life, not big houses and lots of cars. It would require a marketing effort of biblical proportions, but certainly far easier than the task that we're on now, which is failing. Because the metrics that I'm looking at, again, showcase that we continue to go in the wrong direction with greenhouse gases, which suggests the methodology that we're currently using is ineffective. And we need to find a methodology that can be effective, because we only have one planet. And if we destroy this planet, trying to terraform the planet after the fact, probably won't work. And even if it does, the level of effort, pain, and individual struggle that everybody's going to have to go through as we go through a process like that would be monumental. I mean, unbelievably difficult. And avoiding that should be a much higher, in my view, should be a much higher priority than it is.
Thank you, Professor David Smith.
Agree 100% with what Rob said, is that we need to prioritize these going forward. And but I do want to go back just a second to what Dr. Talib said earlier too, is that the incentives are not necessarily in place for the developing nations, even with some of the output from COP27. And you begin to see that the whole area of the loss and damages fund are necessary, but they're not solving the type of problem there. In fact, Rob had talked earlier about the targets going up when it should be going down. The target was 1.5 degrees of climate increase, where it looks like it's going to be closer to 2.7 or 3, which is a real challenge. The other area, though, is we've talked mostly about the government input. And while you were offline, Talib, I talked about the role of entrepreneurships and small, medium businesses in there. But if you go back and look at what was happened during COP27, there was a whole discussion there about the role of non-state actors, such as regions, cities, companies, affiliated groups such as religion and others that can work and play in here. And you see that these non-state actors, if you look at their collaborative work together, can actually begin to drive action to contribute to and actually help increase the national ambitions of each of them. And part of the COP process and the UN process on this is the net zero approach. And these non-state actors, as well as the state actors, as well as the large commercial companies, the small and medium-sized commercial companies, each have a role there. But you have to begin to get all of these to work together, as Rob was talking about, where you can meet the commitments related to the status that we're trying to achieve with climate reduction. So where can these target settings that we talked about earlier, the measurements, the KPIs that both Rob and I've talked about, how can these be done looking across the global economy? And how can these be replicated? How can these be applied down at the individual levels to the developing nations, to the non-state actors, to the commercial companies? How can each of these goals, such as getting back to 1.5 degrees Celsius of climate change versus where it looks like we're going to be closer to a 2.7 under the current projections of climate change, how can we begin to slow it and get back to the targets that were there, or even decrease it further as we look at net zero and below zero in reductions as we go forward? So Sharif, I think that's part of the challenges as we look at this, is how to look at the entire collective of the people who have an impact and who are impacted, and how to solve, as I've said before, interacting with climate is a systems of systems problem. How can you get all the systems to work together to achieve this type of output? So Sharif, I think that's my comment.
Thank you, Dr. Musa.
Thank you so much for giving me a chance to talk. As I said before, that I am proud that COP27 held in Sharm el-Sheikh as a message to all countries in all the world that peace is so important. We cannot do anything without peace, but with peace we can do everything. With cooperation. The second thing, I hope that we can all, fight, war, fight racism, fight injustice, that we can, move forward. The third thing, we are looking, for
We need
universal adoption of the new technology, for example, IoT, cloud computing, Internet of Things, that will help, a lot in fighting, all climate change problem. And adoption of this technology, not only, in America, or, in Russia, and in China, in Asia, but also in Africa and Arab countries. That's why, I am proud that Egypt hosts the COP27 as a representative of developing country or Africa, and next year, Emirat will host COP28 as a representative for our country. So it's the first time that I think climate change held in African countries. That's something good. The first thing we're looking for climate justice. So I'm talking about climate change justice to let all women, all children to participate. For example, if the developed country promised the developing country to pay $100 billion every year, must fulfill the promise to move forward. That's all I want to say. It's my pleasure to be with you today. Thank you so much.
Dr. Talib,
yes.
can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah,
What
can
you want
hear
to
you.
add? Yes.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Good. Okay. I'm having difficulty still with my connection, but that's part of the developing world. Now I'm talking about the developing world here, because the developing world is not really interested in climate change. I know that Egypt is very proud of having the meeting held at Sharm el-Sheikh, and the Emirates would be very proud of having themselves host the climate change. But the fact is that the ordinary man in the street has other priorities in life other than climate change. They have to think about democracy. They have to think about their rights. They have to think about their food. They have to think about their survival. So they can't think about the future, unfortunately. That's a fact. Now, if you ask anybody in the streets in these worlds, these developing countries, what do you think of climate change? They would smile and laugh. They would say it's a problem of the developed world. It's not our problem. That's what I want to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Professor Rob, what's your concluding remarks for today's session?
Fighting climate change is probably the biggest test on the human race that is currently in place. The other ones is, can we control the weapons we create? And we're failing the test at the moment. My sense is I have severe doubts whether that's going to change by 2030 or 2050, which suggests whether it's a developed country or developing country, much of the effort now needs to go to mitigating climate change and assuring the citizens are safe, the economy safe, and the country's ability to provide clean food, water, and medicine is unaffected by the changes in the world until such time that it gets so bad that we have no choice but to fix it. So at the end, particularly when we're talking about the emerging countries, because Talib's correct, absolutely correct. If you're fighting for food, water, and just to survive, not throwing stuff away and trying to move from petrochemical to electricity in your vehicles is going to be a fairly low priority in comparison. And the way to fix that would be to make sure that the developing countries have the funding and resources they need to do the job that must be done. But if the developed countries aren't going to do the work to make it happen, then funding developing nations to do it isn't going to happen either, because they're just not motivated to make it happen. So in the end, standing by year after year and watching, people's homes swept away by floods and destroyed by hurricanes and excuse me, and the different impacts of climate change that aren't being currently mitigated becomes problematic, because the country lives on its citizens, and you lose enough of your citizens either through people that are vacating the country because they're fleeing the changing climate, or because they're dying as a result of climate change, is problematic for any government. And so assuring the safety and continuity of the civilization of the people in the country becomes a very high priority. And that priority should drive a number of changes across the world in terms of how people are protected and how the resources they depend upon are protected and assured throughout this very change. If we want to make a change here, we really do have to drive down to the individual, regardless of where they live, and get them motivated to change the way they do things. But if we're unwilling to do that, then we need to move to ensuring the individual has the tools that they need to survive the changes that are to come. And at the very least, know not to move into and develop housing in areas that are likely to fail as a result of climate change. For instance, you don't want to be on the coast of Florida at the moment. So in the end, I think we need to take a step back, and where possible, resources need to be shifted to surviving climate change, particularly for those areas that are going to be most hard hit by it. If it's an island that's 2 inches above sea level, those people are going to have to be moved. You're probably not going to be able to afford to build a wall around the island. And just standing there and telling stories about how these people's lives are going to be destroyed isn't going to solve the problem. You actually have to do something. So in the end, I think a lot of the effort that we're currently mostly, and sadly, mostly it's just vocal effort at the level of progress just isn't where it needs to be, in my view. And certainly the metrics, as we mentioned earlier, are all going on the wrong direction. So a much greater effort now needs to go into assuring that these countries can protect their citizens, because if they don't, they may very soon not be viable as countries. And that is a very real threat for any political party or entity out there, because often when a government fails catastrophically, the politicians are held to account, and the end is not at all convenient or pleasant. So it is incredibly important that governments protect their people and make sure that they can assure that during these hard times ahead, that those people will survive.
Thank you. Professor David Smith, what's your concluding remarks?
Boy, this has been such a good panel today. I could almost just say ditto everything that's been said for the last hour. Is the concluding remarks. But I really believe some of the key elements of what Dr. Talib said. The common citizen doesn't see how they can have an impact. And if you look at a large percentage of the citizens around the world, they don't believe climate change is real because they don't feel the impacts in a way that there's a cause and effect type relationship to them. Particularly if I look at the governments around the world in regard to climate change, most of the governments have other issues beginning to affect them. You know, I doubt if I went into Ukraine today, climate change is the top of their mind with the war that's going on there. So, you know, that's an extreme example there. But if I look at food shortages, if I look at energy shortages and other things that are there, a lot of the world is going to try to, the world governments, particularly in developing nations, are going to try to solve those problems before they get to the climate change issues. And it's like Dr. Tleep said, it's just not high on their list of what they think they can have an impact on. And that's something that the United Nations has not done a good job on of helping people understand the impacts. Climate change is, gee, everyone else should do this, but I don't think I need to, is something that I've seen since the initial Paris Accord. And it's hard to change people's thoughts. It's hard to change culture. And reacting to that is a cultural change as well. So that to me is that we know climate change is there, but it's going to be hard to get the global action in place to have the impacts that need to happen to get to net zero and to not have these degrees increasing. Missing the target by almost 100% is a large impact, a very large impact. So from 1.5 degrees centigrade to 2.7 degrees centigrade will have massive impact on a global scale. And it's just hard for people to understand what that type of change will have an impact. But it's something that needs to be worked upon, but I just don't see solutions for solving it now. But some of the impacts of making money available out of COP27, if it's administered well and targeted well, can have an impact. So Sharif, thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Musa, what's your concluding remarks?
Yeah, first, I would like to say that we need, to hand over, the plan to the new generation, in a better way, like not in a bad economy, in a war, in COVID-19, in climate change. So I think this is, our last chance, to do something, for the for our also for the new generation. Also, if I would like to talk about, COP27, we know that the Paris Climate Agreement of 2015, we have witnessed, a collapse of the first line of reducing harmful emission. But the world is still far, from achieving, the goals of carbon neutrality, and, the certain, to put the temperature below 1.5 degree during the first industrial revolution. So also, we exposed to a new catastrophe after a European country restored to energy derived from the burning coal, because what's happened, Ukraine and, Russia, because of the crisis, of the war. That's why, we have to go to peace, not in war. So we have to sense, to adapt the harmful effect of, climate change. And we need, to do a lot of things, regarding the, irrigation system, water management, protection of agriculture, and maintenance, of urban area. Also, we have adaptation, has declined due to excessive optimistic that the world will be able to support that, but, by mitigating harmful emission, which does not happen. So also, we have to concentrate about losses and damage, and I think COP27, succeeded in that to become an imaginary line with continuous, for the people of the developing country. Also, since since World War combined with the confusion, Corona pandemic and the Corona war affected, a lot for effort, for this climate change. For in Sharm el-Sheikh, prepare and organize, the largest, annual political and development event. A lot, of parts, participate. And I think there's a lot of change happened, in the agenda regarding energy, regarding water, agriculture, food, environment. A lot of things, discussed, with all parts. But if I would like to say about the positives that the project, or the positive things that done during this COP 27, about, accelerating to achieve the SDG by 2030. So, this is something good to finance the, climate action project, according to, for example, you make it like the, repayment period of no less than 20 years, and a cost of no more than 1% include administration expenses. So also there's a proposal, for example, for the developing country to get about 100 billion, but this, are retarded in this to fulfill the policy. So contribution of the private investment, for this does not exceed 1% of the total funding. That's why you have to go to this finance project. So I hope that, continuous effort will do, start from now till the end of the year, till the meeting of COP 28, and I hope that will do better for the, climate change, for better world, to hand over, the earth in a better way for the new generation, not in COVID-19, in bad economy, in a war, and climate change. Thank you so much for giving me a chance to speak with you today. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Talib Rafal, what's your concluding remarks for today's session?
I want to say that our discussion here is an elitist discussion. We're talking amongst elite only. We're not talking about the ordinary people in the streets at all. And education is very, very important in this regard. Climate change is real, for sure it's real. Nobody should doubt that. But the interest in climate change has to be more acute into this. And the developed world has a responsibility in this. They have responsibility in funding the projects. They have a responsibility in doing what's right. Paris Agreement was a very good agreement, but the UN together is now being doubted. Now the UN as a multilateral system of the world is being questioned because COVID-19, for example, the UN did not do much work. Not any multilateral system. Even the EU did not do that good. The EU was having different styles of dealing with the problem in different countries. You had France, you had England, you had Germany. Each one of them had a different system. One of them had testing enough. The other had quarantine, and the third one had something else. So the multilateral system needs to be revived again. And that's a very important thing in climate change. Now, climate change is a very real thing, as I said. But we need to work together to raise the awareness of the people on this issue. That's very important because politicians are not going to direct themselves into climate change. We've seen what Trump has done, for example. They are more interested in winning their elections in the Western world. And the governments in the developing world are only interested in staying alive. And they don't think of the future now. What they need to think is today. What's happening today is very important. Now, we cannot allow this to continue because we have to think of the future. We have to think of climate change. We all have to do this together. That's what I want to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining today's session. I request all of our audience, please share our content as agency, corporation, and academy. So hopefully, through this dialogue, we can take more good decisions and we can create awareness. We can build up the capacity of the developing nations because many things for the developing nations people maybe they do not understand what's going on inside COP20. We have our expert panelists. I think they discuss already, and we can learn more and we can grow together. Thank you, Professor Dr. Talib Rafal, for your excellent guideline. Professor Rob and Dr. Mo, for your continuous support for World Talent Economy Forum. Thank you, bye bye,
Thank
and
you
take
so
care.
much. Bye bye. Bye bye. Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you all. Bye. Bye.